Hello, it's Look Movie Recaps here. Today I'm explaining a 2017 American horror and thriller film titled Get Out. Watch out for spoilers. The movie begins with a black guy named Dree. He is walking alone at night through a perfectly developed suburban street. A small sports car pulls up and starts slowly tracking him, and when he realizes it, he changes directions to steadily walk back the way he came from. When he turns to see what the car is up to, he sees it's parked where it was, but the door is open. From out of nowhere, a man in a helmet attacks the black guy and drags his body to the car. We shift scenes to Rose, who has come to pay a visit to her photographer boyfriend Chris and brought him some snacks. They're getting ready to go away for the weekend to visit Rose's family. Chris is concerned that they don't know that she's dating a black guy. She assures him that her parents are really nice people and they like black people, and that they even voted for Obama. Chris asks if he is the only black guy she has ever dated, and Rose says yes. While driving to her parents', he grabs a cigarette, but Rose takes it and throws it out the window. Her parents would really be unhappy with her dating a smoker. Chris calls his friend Rod. He reminds him to take care of his dog and not to feed him human food. Rod sarcastically warns him about going to visit the white folks and says it's a bad idea. He also flirts with Rose a little bit. Chris gets a little jealous and Rose thinks it's sweet. While they're deep in conversation and not entirely paying attention to the road, they accidentally knock a deer. They pull over to investigate and call the police. When the police shows up and ask what they're doing in the area, Rose tells them that they're visiting her family. The officer asks to see Chris's ID, but Rose steps in and says that she was the one driving, and there is no reason as to why he is asking for Chris's ID. It's clear the officer was a racist. The officer then lets them go. Chris tells Rose that defending him felt hot and romantic. Rose tells him that she can't allow anyone to mess with her man in her presence. Later, they arrive at her parents' home. Her dad, Dean Armitage, is a friendly neurosurgeon. He tells Chris that he would have voted for Obama the third time, if he stood again for presidency. Her mom, Missy, is a strangely cold hypnotherapist, who offers to cure Chris of his nicotine addiction through hypnosis, but he doesn't feel cool with people playing around in his head. Dean gives Chris a tour of the house. Dean shows Chris pictures of Rose's brother, who will be joining them later. He's a surgeon like his dad, and also shows him old family photos of his dad. He says his dad was beaten out by Jesse Owens to compete in the Olympics in front of Hitler, and while that was sad for his dad, it was still great to have Hitler's Aryan idealism proven wrong. So he says that his dad's claim to fame was beaten by Jesse Owens in the qualifying round in the Berlin Olympics in 1936. He then taps on the basement door. Dean says it's closed off due to black mold in the basement, so they had to seal it. Later, while Dean is showing him outside, Chris notices that they got two black house helpers, Georgina, the lady he met earlier in the house, and now Walter. It looks like in the old times of slavery. When Dean acknowledges this, he explains that they were hired to take care of his parents, and when his parents passed away, he felt bad letting them go definitely, so they remained and instead he hired them permanently. Later, when Chris tries to talk to Walter, who he regards as his kind, he notices something off about Walter. He has a definite stiff step for artificial politeness, and also speaks using dated vernacular. Same applies to Georgina. While at dinner, Dean reveals that they will be having a get-together party, that usually happens annually. Missy then asks Chris about his parents. He mentions that his mother died in an accident and his dad left when he was too young. Then, Georgina comes to serve them drinks, and while doing so, she is seen acting awkwardly. Shortly, Rose's brother Jeremy arrives. He's an aggressively dickish rich kid. That night, the family has dinner and a drunk Jeremy starts talking to Chris about fighting. He says that because Chris is naturally melanin, he is hard like stone and probably a natural fighter. He wants to fight, but Chris says that he has rules about play fighting with drunks. Dean and Missy tell Jeremy that maybe it's time for him to go to bed. Chris and Rose retire to their room. Rose apologizes to Chris for her family behavior, and they go to sleep. In the middle of the night, Chris gets up and decides to sneak out for a cigarette. While outside, he sees something in the distance. He notices it's Walter. He heads straight for Chris but makes a sharp turn at the last moment and runs off in another direction. Inside the house, Georgina is staring out the window. It turns out she's looking at her own reflection, not Chris. She adjusts her hair and Chris decides to head back inside. Before Chris can make it back to his room, Missy turns on a light and startles him. She tells him that smoking is a bad habit and offers again to help. He sits down and mocks the notion of hypnotism, unaware of the fact that she's slowly hypnotizing him. While using her teaspoon as a focus object, she takes him back to when he was 11 on the night his mom died. She didn't come home from work and he was too scared to do anything about it. He was afraid that if he called the police it would make it real, so he just sat there watching television, nervously digging his nails into his bed. Present day, Chris is doing the same thing. Digging his nails into the arms of the chair, she tells him to sink, and 11-year-old Chris sinks into his present day. Chris sinks into blackness, seeing himself and Missy far above. His consciousness has left his body while his body is still paralyzed in his chair. He wakes in the morning and checks his phone. Rod has sent him a picture of him pretending to give his dog beer. His battery is low, so he plugs it in. Chris tells Rose that he thinks maybe her mom hypnotized him. He narrates to her the weird experience he had that night. She is embarrassed that her mom would do that without Chris's permission. That day, a bunch of white rich people show up to the Armitage house in black cars. While at the party, all of the white folks are asking him weird questions about what he thinks of certain subjects, and how it feels to be a black man in today's society. Chris also goes up to another black guy at the party and diverts the same question to him, but the guy acts completely off. It actually turns out to be the guy that was kidnapped at the beginning of the movie, and he is acting completely different, and it's when Chris realizes that there is something wrong about these people. Chris being freaked out, he goes out on his own to take some pictures. He meets a blind man that believes Chris has a great eye for photography. Chris wonders how he sees his photos when blind, but the guy explains that he has a team that sees and explains photos to him. In other scenes, Chris goes up to grab his phone and it's once again plugged out from the charger. He believes that Georgina has been unplugging it every time he leaves it in the room. With barely any battery on it, he calls Rod and tells him that he was hypnotized last night without his consent. Rod suggests to him to get out of there as fast as he can. Rod theorizes that maybe those black people are under some spell, and that's why they are all acting all weirdly. After Chris hangs up the phone, Georgina shows up and is extremely weird in front of him. She starts crying for no reason at all, while apologizing for unplugging his phone from the charger. Later, he walks back outside. Chris has met with all of the guests, but still they can't take their eyes off of him. He goes to snap a picture of who he thinks is Andre, the guy that was kidnapped at the beginning of the movie, so he can show to Rod. The flash goes on and Andre goes wild on him and yells at Chris to get out. While on the strike, they struggle to hold him down. He is taken inside and they are able to calm him down. The flashlight must have triggered him and he was his normal self for a moment. Here we learn that all the black people that are in the Armitage compound must be under some spell that we are yet to find out. After seeing this, Chris tells Rose that he wants to leave and doesn't feel comfortable being in this place anymore. Rose tells her if it is what he wants then they should go pack up their stuff and prepare to leave. While Chris and Rose are talking by the lake, Dean Armitage is hosting a silent auction, and obviously this auction is for Chris's body. They are going to make him go to the sunken place permanently, so one of the white people can have his body by removing Chris's brain and inserting their brain inside of his head. The blind man we saw Chris speak to earlier happens to be the highest bidder, as he wants Chris's eye for photography. Rose agrees to go home with Chris. While Chris is upstairs packing, he finds a shoe box in the closet that has Rose's pictures. He sees a bunch of different black people with Rose including Walter and Georgina, so Chris immediately connects the dots, why this could be the case. Rose is used by her parents to collect black people so Dean can take them through his psychic procedures. After learning this, Rose reappears but Chris does not say anything to her. All he wants is to be out of the place as soon as possible. As he is walking down the stairs, he asks Rose for the keys. Rose says she can't find the keys, but then we get our first big twist. Rose has been part of the scam the whole time. She targets black guys and makes them her boyfriends so she can bring them to her parents to sell off their bodies to capable white folks. When Chris tries fighting his way out of the house, Missy clanks her teacup which makes Chris hypnotized and go into the sunken place. Jeremy and Dean then bring Chris's body downstairs and tie him up to a chair, so he can watch some video to explain what exactly is happening to him and to make sure they have full control over his brain. On the other side, Rod is worried about his best friend, so he continues to call Chris, but getting no feedback. He starts to think something has happened to him. Back to Chris, he wakes up tied to the chair, and a TV screen turns on explaining to Chris something about the coagula procedure. The procedure was founded by Dean and it involves putting someone else's brain into Chris's body. Chris's soul will remain but he will not have any control over his body. The man in the video is Dean Armitage's dad. We also learn that his soul is in Walter's body and Rose's grandma is in Georgina's body. It all makes sense now to Chris. Back to Rod, he calls Chris's phone once again and Rose answers. She explains to Rod that Chris took a taxi out of town as he was freaked out by her family. Rod doesn't buy it for a second. On the other hand, Dean has started the coagula procedure and he has already opened up his client's skull. Chris, unaware of what to do, he starts scratching the cotton in his chair hoping to get himself free, until the television set turns on and it is a video of the teacup that triggers him into a state of hypnosis. As Jeremy comes into the room to wheelchair Chris to the procedure room, Chris actually picked enough cotton to plug in his ears so he wouldn't hear the teacup on the TV screen. Chris then gets loose and knocks Jeremy out with a heavy ball that was in the room. Dean Armitage, confused on what is taking Jeremy so long, he comes into the hallway where Chris rams a deer head into his body, which kills him. While he is walking to get out throughout the house, he comes face to face with Missy. Chris quickly breaks the teacup so it can't be used on him, and he also kills Missy right away. Apparently, Jeremy didn't die earlier, so he comes upstairs to fight with Chris, but Chris manages to get the best of him and kills him. Rose is upstairs scoping out her next victim. As Chris is driving away, Georgina jumps in front of the car to try and stop him. Rose then hears the commotion going on downstairs. Chris puts Georgina into the car hoping to save her, but she wakes up and causes them to wreck, and she dies as well. Rose keeps on shooting him as she orders Walter to chase him down, when Walter captures Chris. He smartly uses his phone to flash Walter free, as he did with Andre. And once Walter is free, he shoots Rose, and he shoots himself as well. Chris finishes her off by choking her. A police car shows up, and it turns out to be Rod, just in time to save the day. This could have been a terrible ending if it was a regular cop, because they wouldn't have believed Chris's wild story. Rod tells Chris that he tried warning him. The movie ends. If you have watched this far, thank you. Subscribe, like and comment to support the channel out. Have a great day.